Hello, welcome to the question and answer section of my Festival of Ideas talk called Taking Action or Talking Action, Coping with Uncertainty. This is the main talk, is also available on Watch Again, minus the technical issues, and that's in a separate link from the question and answer that I'm doing now. Can I just say thank you so much for all of those who gave me such lovely comments about the technical issues and how apparently I modelled how to deal with uncertainty live in person, the irony not being lost on anyone. Yes, anyway, that's been edited out, as I say, from the Watch Again. So you won't get to enjoy me coping with uncertainty live for a second time. That was just special for those of you who watched it the first time. Also, yeah, just to say this artwork here, this is the uncertainty principle. For those of you who are asking, it's the equation for the uncertainty principle, a la Schrodinger's cat, reflected in a couple of mirrors there. Hence the title, Reflections on Uncertainty. Right, okay. So, some of you asked me about the mind magic trick, so we'll get that out of the way first. The bit of distraction and magic that I did for you. Somebody said, did I have 3 cards in the envelope? No, I didn't. I thought I'd showed you that clear enough, so, but perhaps over the internet I didn't. Obviously, there's no point in me proving it to you now, but no, there was just the 1 card in the envelope. But what's interesting about that is that once people have ruled out one way that they can understand how the trick works, they tend to slip then, once that's been proved wrong, they slip straight back into magical thinking and believing that I must have controlled their minds in some way. Maybe it's because the first slide was blue. But if you think about it, I'm not going to be using that kind of psychological trick because I can't rely on that, can I? Imagine if it went wrong, how awkward the rest of the talk would be if I got that bit wrong. So if you just, stick with the concept that it cannot go wrong for me, then you'll be on the right track. So, the person who said, is there another card inside the envelope? You're on the right track, but just you have to keep going with it and think of further alternatives. I won't reveal it because it's magic, and you must never reveal your tricks. So there you go. I'll leave you to think on that. So we talked about PERMA towards the end, coming out of positive psychology, the research where they look for what ideal mentally well people do, and so that we can copy that. And what I need to say about this is, those people who thrive under pressure and in adversity, what is it that they do? And this is the collated evidence. I hope that came through in my talk. The idea that if we increase positive feelings and engage with life, yeah, and if we have authentic relationships, we connect socially with people, and if we are engaged in activity which is considered activity that is meaningful, that sense of achievement and purpose in life is what leads to flourishing. So that coping with challenge and uncertainty becomes more manageable than it would do. We're not going to be able to take away the adversity and the uncertainty, but we are going to be able to support ourselves by using the framework of PERMA to look at what we're actually doing in our lives. Okay. My purpose in life is to increase well-being by doing my bit to shift the well-being curve that I showed you up, so that we can in society generally be on an upward trend and on a positive spiral, and that the more people there are with well-being, the more flourishes there are, because particularly people who are flourishing, their positivity has a ripple effect to those around them, and they're more likely to connect with others. They're more likely to bring everybody else up. So because we're all interconnected, the concept that if I can just help just a few people to improve their well-being, it's an ongoing propagating, self-propagating approach. One of my other purposes in life that makes my life meaningful is just to be generally, playful. Like, for example, punning. Apologies to those people who don't like a pun. Punning, being playful, is something else that I love to do. So I guess the ultimate thing is do what you do best. To work that out, you'll need to work out what your strengths are. People who flourish tend to be aware of their weaknesses, but they don't dwell on them. They are aware particularly of their strengths, and they do things which build their strengths further and further. They work out what their superpowers are, and they make use of them in their day-to-day life. So how do you work out what your strengths are? Well, you can do it by self-reflection, you can do it by having the headspace I was mentioning, but you can also measure them using the VIA Character Strengths Questionnaire, which comes out of positive psychology, and Martin Seligman and various proponents of that new area of psychology, relatively new area. So have a look for VIA Character Strengths Questionnaire. It's about 96 items, I think, and it will give you your top 24 character strengths. Of course, some will have to be at the bottom. So again, don't dwell on those. They're all desirable things. So it will be painful when you see what's at the bottom of your character strengths list. But it's worth doing, because then you will know what your top strengths are. And you can think about in your life, what will you do to build on those? Okay, and that's a route to well-being. We mentioned that action is the antidote to anxiety. Action is better than inaction, except that you need the headspace to make sure that your action matches your ideals. And so therefore, don't just do something, sit there. And some of you mentioned that you really liked that one. Don't just do something, sit there, as an aphorism that you might take away from the talk. And so that made me think, well, I just want to share with you a brilliant little vignette, a little story. It's, I think, from Buddhist philosophy that Judith Anderson shared with me. She's a Jungian psychotherapist that lives on the same Derwent-Thorpe estate as me. And I loved this. So here's the little story. There are two fellows walking down the river bank, enjoying a summer's day, and just being mindful in nature. And then they realised that they could hear somebody shouting, and then there's person after person coming down the river, struggling and drowning and unable to cope as they more and more people start coming down the river. So what do? Well, of course they act, don't they? And they start trying to grab people and pull them onto the bank, and feverishly working away. But the people are coming down the river faster than they can pull them out. So what can they do? They just keep going. They keep going, and then suddenly one of them just sits down on the bank and stops. And the fellow who's still working, pulling people out of the river, is just wondering, what on earth are you doing? What are you doing? He's just sitting there. He stopped. And then he gets up and starts walking off in the other direction. So the man who's still pulling people out of the river is shouting, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm going back upstream to see who's throwing people in." So I hope that the parable there is clear in terms of sometimes when we get in the thick of it, don't just do something, sit there, make sure that your actions are efficient and on track and most effective that you can do. I mentioned Headspace, which I realise is actually quite a well-known app now, isn't it, for teaching you positive thinking and better sleep and mindfulness, and it is a great app, but that's not what I meant. I meant more broadly space for your head, time to yourself to think and work out your ideas so that your action is considered. the Headspace app is, by all accounts, excellent as well, but that's not what I was referring to specifically. Yeah. So actions that are based on your ideals, the definition of flourishing, giving you that meaning and purpose, builds upon Headspace, where your unconscious mind lets your priorities arise, it knows what you know best, and also generates energy for feeding into that action. So this was this metacognitive model that I built. That I didn't discuss was the real ideal element, and that's where you also reflect, you your Headspace, upon whether you are achieving your meaning and purpose, but tempering that with the concept that your ideal is an ideal and not a real idea of what you can possibly achieve. And so just tempering that and holding things in tension, where you realize you have competing priorities, you can't get it all right. And so your real self and what is really a possible in a day is taken into account when reflecting back on whether you are actually achieving all the action that you want to achieve. So real versus ideal is a sort of important linchpin in your reflection on that. And that comes back to sort of a rational thinking and positive thinking. So we had this excellent question and answer from you guys. Why are Zoom meetings so exhausting? And somebody said Zoom is exhausting because you can't make normal eye contact or see other bodily communication, which linked to what I was saying about FaceTime and Facebook and the oxytocin. This person was saying that unlike a phone call where you don't expect to get that information, Zoom is unusual because your brain tries to function as if you were face-to-face in the normal way. And I absolutely agree with this. So thanks for that comment. I wanted to add to that. What's actually happening is that you are not just expecting that, but you are learning the new rules. So I don't think the exhaustion, the good news is I don't think the exhaustion of using a lot of Zoom is going to last, because we will learn how to cope with the new social rules afresh. So like when a toddler is learning all about all the non-verbal communication cues and having to learn new language every day, they get completely exhausted too, don't they? And that's the position that we're in now with this new interface. So just to put that in context, the non-verbal communication is a huge element of understanding what's going on. So I'll just take something to give you an idea about the vast processing power that we are using effortlessly on a moment-to-moment basis when we are dealing with communication. So, for example, after a sentence is finished, when you're having a conversation with somebody, there's a 200 millisecond gap on average between one utterance and the next person's utterance. And that is a very, very short gap. It takes far longer than that to retrieve one word that you intend to say. So in other words, you've already planned what words you're going to say halfway through the last sentence that you were listening to. You've predicted what the person was saying. And you have already planned what you are going to say in advance. So much so that when we hear the gap between utterances, there's a rich amount of information in that. So if somebody comes in earlier, for example, than the 200 milliseconds, we know that they are possibly impatient, or they might be enthusiastic to answer. There is information in the length of the gap. Or maybe the gap is longer, the 200 milliseconds, which means that perhaps confused or in disagreement, and they're making a pointed pause. So there's all sorts of potential information within just, let's say, one piece of nonverbal communication, the gap between utterances. And so how do you know? Is it indifference? Is it enthusiasm? Well, you know that by looking at other aspects of their non-verbal communications, like their body posture, their facial expression, all sorts of other information that you're taking in. As I say, just astonishing processing power that we're completely unaware of. We do this effortlessly, picking up the tone and all of those things. So what I'm saying is, now, if the pause is not the right length, we've got to process the concept of, is that because it's intended, or because the internet has slowed a bit and there's a bit more of a glitch? We have to relearn all the possibilities and add more layers of potential confusion on top and process those. And we are getting used to that, and it takes a bit of time, but fairly soon the new layer of social rules will become just as effortless as anything else. So that's my prediction. Zoom is exhausting for those reasons, but it will get better. Another question: how do I deal with anger? Like, for example, the government. What are powerful others doing? Things that you can't control. What's going on in America? What's Trump doing? What's fires in Australia? All of these uncontrollable things. And I've got a top tip for that. That's a good question. This was from a best-selling book from quite a while ago, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It's a classic, but it still works. And if you know about it, I'm just going to remind you. So this is the exercise you can do. What you do is you just draw a circle, okay, and then you write in that circle everything that bothers you, everything that's of concern, from losing your keys to global warming, everything that's on your mind, and that's your circle of concern, okay. And then you identify your circle of influence. So out of all of that vast array of things, what are the ones that you can actually do something about? What are the ones that you can take steps to change? And that's your circle of influence. The concept being that those people who are highly successful and flourishing do not waste a single bit of energy on anything which isn't in their circle of influence. They take action, they take step-by-step action on the things that they can change, and the rest is just, they don't waste a thought on it. And what happens if you only use your energy for the things you can control? Well, your circle of influence grows, because you've not wasted any time and energy on things that aren't in your circle of influence. And you become president, and then, if I rule the world, it'd all be great, wouldn't it? I mean, jokes. But yeah, you see the point. So that's an exercise you could do in order to deal with those, absolutely correct emotions, but to minimize how much they bog you down. Okay. Oh, and yes, this one, dealing with anger. Alain de Botton is a philosopher. He does some good TED Talks as well. And I like him. I don't always agree with what he says, but he always gives me a refreshing perspective on things. So one of the things that was reassuring me the other day was he was talking about just how difficult people are to live with. And he was saying, if you don't think you are really difficult to live with, then you're wrong, you're deluded. You probably aren't aware of what makes you particularly exquisitely difficult to live with, because your loved ones won't tell you for fear of hurting you, and your acquaintances won't bother, for why would they bother broaching that difficult subject? So you never really know what it is about you particularly that makes you so exquisitely difficult to live with. But just suffice to say, we all are. And that's, again, I find that very reassuring, because, it makes me feel better about myself and about the irritations I feel about family members. Again, we're all in the same boat. And the other refreshing inspiration it gave me was the concept that anger is, at heart, an expression of hope, which is a new way of looking at it. Saying that, there we are. Anger is an emotion driven by hope. Though anger seems a pessimistic response to a situation, it is at root a symptom of hope. The hope that the world can be better than it is. The man who shouts every time he loses his house keys is betraying a beautiful but rash faith in a universe in which keys never go astray. The woman who grows furious every time a politician breaks an election promise reveals a precarious utopian belief that elections do not involve deceit. The news shouldn't eliminate any the news shouldn't eliminate angry responses, but it should help to be angry for the right reasons, to the right degree, for the right length of time, and as part of a constructive project. And whenever it is possible, that the news should be help us with mourning the twisted nature of man and reconciling us with the difficulty of being able to imagine perfection while still not managing to secure it for a range of stupid but nevertheless unbudgeable reasons. And I was talking to my great friend Dan Bays about this, and he, as usual, came up with a brilliant comedy version of it. I can't try and do an impression, but he does it better. So this is when you're angry, I don't know, with your spouse or whatever, and with this new idea on board, you're like, I am so hopeful right now. Oh, what you did just reminded me of how hopeful I am. I can't do it, but you get the point. So yeah, anger springs from hope, a new perspective. Some people were expressing some concrete examples of the stress they're under, and thank you very much for that. There's some here, people having to deal with generating future scenarios and at work, and a lot of the classic experiences of uncertainty at the moment. I hope you got some ideas to deal with some of that from my talk. Shakespeare said that there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, which is true to a point. This reminded me of when my children earlier in the year before lockdown went mad for picking up litter on the cycle track on the way to school and begging me, even in the winter rain, could they be picking up rubbish on the way to school. And I just thought to myself, imagine if I told my children that they must do it, how awful they would think I was. They'd be in touch with Childline, and rightly so. So the point being, the same action is viewed so differently depending on the control you feel over it, depending on your point of view, where it's pointful and not pointless what you're doing. So is there a way that you can reframe some of these difficulties so that you feel that you're doing something meaningful? That doesn't stop things being really hard, but taking a break, being open to the difficulties until they get better again. I love this concept of being good enough, taking that new approach and coming up with sort of affirmations. I can cope with this, I am doing my best with this. Having self-compassion so that you can have compassion for others, that they're asking you to do these unacceptable things. This concept of being good enough, perfectionism versus healthy striving, and there's some wonderful research coming out of York St John University here in York, and they've been looking at the difference between those people who are perfectionists and those people who are healthy strivers. Very, very similar and majorly overlapping personality traits, but one leads to well-being and one leads to all sorts of problems. So perfectionism often leads to procrastination for fear of it not being perfect. It can be paralyzing due to the fear of failure. Whereas healthy striving, people really want to get things right, but they recognize failure as an opportunity to learn, and they welcome difficulties as challenges and opportunities. They've still got lots of energy for self-improvement and for getting things right and really trying hard, but they don't have the downsides that perfectionism. Anyway, if you look on perfectionism, York St John, you'll find some of the research that they've been very recently doing upon that. Somebody asked, what happens if you don't get human touch? We've been, some of us, on our own and unable to hug, and as I said, there are other ways that we can build oxytocin with shared conversation, shared emotion, shared eye contact. If we can't actually get skin-to-skin contact. But there's a really interesting piece of research with, it's a bit sad really, old ladies who take a bath, so they immerse themselves in hot water, are less likely to die than old ladies who don't like baths and can't have hot baths anymore. Obviously, old ladies are often living on their own, and so that's the group we're talking about. And yeah, you can predict who is most likely to die in any given period. It's a strong correlation with hot baths and survival for a longer period of time. So why is that? And they think it's because the being warm, being immersed in warmth, is associated with being hugged as a small child, as an infant, and being enveloped in hugging arms. And so that association is enough to actually make a difference to their immune system and their well-being, which is just remarkable, really, isn't it? So yeah, have a warm bath if you really can't get enough hugs. Somebody was talking about rephrasing the language. A lot of my quotes had suffering in them, including Buddha's noble truth. And I think, yeah, language is incredibly important. Agreed. That is the nature of reframing as well, isn't it? To shift our perspective and think about things through a different lens of using different language. So excellent point made. And one of you talked about, in relation to the but swap, the yes and. So this is a really good way of disagreeing politely and being positive, and you can use this in your internal dialogue as well. So yes, it's difficult, and I've learned things. So yes and rather than no but, as a way of dealing with other people's suggestions and also your own mind. I love that. If you want to explore fear, but in a way that brings humour, somebody shared this with me, Harry and Chris's fear song. Just thought I'd share that to have a look at. Somebody also gave me this, which was some online news, which is actually you can listen to and watch at the same time, which is absolutely great. 8 episodes on YouTube, some good news by John Krasinski. Yeah, check that out. Great top tip. Thank you for that. I mentioned the book by Steven Pinker, and we had. I'm just going to get rid of that. It's pinged up. My 2 screens are playing up again. Here we are. For those of you who watched the original talk, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, here we go. So yes, worldwide violence is at an all-time low, but this person was saying, yeah, just because we know that doesn't mean we kind of believe it on a deep unconscious level. And I thought this was a great point and related to the idea of metacognition. So yes, it helps when you're having headspace to be able to reflect upon your own thinking. That's metacognition. But to know it sort of at a visceral level, moment to moment, is a different matter, and doesn't take away that sense of when all the news comes in so negatively, believing it. It's different from the intellectual exercise of knowing it. I think that's what you're referring to. So for that, I wanted to mention Natasha Devon, who, well, you can look her up, what her past history is. She talked about trying to protect young people from all sorts of evils on the internet, and how you can't do it. She gave a great example of how she gave a sort of young whiz kid, computer whiz kid, a laptop with all of the parental controls that they could possibly muster on it. Okay, and said, could you find me some porn? And in under 30 seconds, he had porn up on the screen. And how had he done it? He just typed in, what's the name for porn in Spanish, and then searched using another language. And of course, all the parental controls were in English. So the point being, you know, you can't protect young people from what they might be exposed to on the internet. So what do? Well, you give them metacognitive training. You train them to be able to think about why they might not want to expose themselves to certain things. You get them to watch, let's say, adverts or any media or news or whatever, and question it. First of all, on a conscious level. So you get them to think, let's say they see an advert with women wearing really high heels to look beautiful. And you get them to think, you know, why is it that the advertisers are using that image? Does having high heels actually equal beauty? Is this is this an ideal or a real kind of model of a woman? Could I possibly measure up to that ideal? You get them to really think about and question everything that they see, and then you ask them to practice that. So we talked about 21 days. If you can practice a mental habit of changing the way that you think from negative to positive, and you keep practicing that, you are changing your neural pathways. And once the neural pathway is in place, it becomes an automatic habit to think that way. So to begin with, it might be quite a lot of effort to improve your well-being by analysing your thought processes, sending out loving kindness on purpose repeatedly, for example, and doing that over and over. But once the neural pathway is in place, after you've done that for 21 days, it's effortless. It's a learnt behaviour. You don't need to do it anymore, and you've changed to become an optimistic person. I mean, I am saying 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100 to an extent, but you get my point. So if we can train our young people and ourselves to constantly question our negative thinking, to constantly question the media onslaught that's coming into us, and think about it in a more sensible way, a more helpful way, a more positive way, and we can do that and be mindful of it for the first while, then it will become part of our mental framework and part of the way that we naturally think about the world. So yeah, that's why I gave you this metacognitive model, so that you can get that overview, so that you can start off by using it as a conscious framework, and it should eventually become something that you just do naturally. There we go. So thank you very much. I hope that question and answer session was also useful. Remember, you can still ask me any questions. I'm not going to do a question and answer video of the question and answers that come out of the question and answers, but I will respond to you personally if you want to send me an email. And thanks again for listening. I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel, my new YouTube channel called A Wandering Mind. And so if you want to look on there and follow me there, I hope to put some more useful things up there as time goes on, and you can share this talk with other people, share the concepts and start exploring some of them yourself. Yeah. So all the very best. Enjoy.